Okay, so let's start. So this is the outline. I'll give you a short introduction about the results of the latest bird directive reporting. So this gives you an idea of what kind of a population status of the Finnish birds at the moment. And then there's going to be like a session about the knowledge gaps of the, especially concerning the declining species. So what are kind of the general themes and more like habitat specific themes. And then there will be some introduction to the potential data sources which could be used to address these questions. And then in the end, Orange Fennica, the editors of the Orange Fennica has asked to give a short update about the situation of the journals, and then we have time for discussions in the end. First of all, why this information is needed about the population drivers. The birds are often used as policy tools in the nature decision making, and this includes indicators, and also many species are hunted or somehow otherwise related to the decision making. And that's why it's important to understand the drivers. So what kind of changes there are, what are the key drivers of the population changes, and how this could affect the management, and how also the management actions could be as efficient as possible. And the Finnish bird expert group, which includes researchers and bird experts in several universities, but also like Finnish Environmental Institute, Metsähallitus, and the former ELY Center, and so on, BirdLife Finland as well. So this is doing the red list evaluation every 10 years. So the next one will be done in around 2028, 29. And then there's the EU bird directive reporting. So every EU member states need to report every 6th year what's the status of the birds. And that's where also this kind of information is needed. And also in the EU level legislation, there's the EU restoration law, which is also leading to changes in the, where also birds have a quite important role, especially farmland and forest birds. And the things are changing. This is a photograph of the flying starling flock. So starling used to be for a long time declining species in Finland, and now in recent years population has been increasing a bit. But of course, as it is not as abundant as it used to be, but it just tells that things are changing, and we don't necessarily understand the changes, what are happening, what the factors influencing those changes. So this bird directive reporting was done last year, and the results were published last year, and this is including population size estimates and trends of all the breeding bird species and certain subspecies. There's also certain winter population sizes and trends of passing through populations, which are also evaluated. These are defined by the EU, so we can't influence that on the national level. And typically, like short-term and long-term trends are given. And certain species which are under conservation concern or are hunted, there's also like evaluation of the pressures and threats and conservation measures. So this includes altogether 122 species. And this also comes directly from the EU, so we can't influence that set of species. But often in many cases, we have only quite weak information what could be those threats or pressures. So here are, in a nutshell, the results of the reporting. So overall in Finland, we have estimated there's about 47 million pairs of breeding birds in Finland, and this is 2.7 million pairs less than in the previous reporting round. The two most abandoned bird species, willow warbler and chaffinch, have also declined, which indicates that there's a large-scale changes in the environment affecting also the very common species. In both cases, we actually don't know really well what are the main drivers. And overall, there are 62 species which are increasing, and 80 species which are declining. So there are more declining species than increasing species, and that just tells that there are the biodiversity loss is continuing also in case of the Finnish birds. And there's also even in birds, which is the best known taxonomy group among all the taxa, we still have quite a few species where we actually don't know the population trend too well, and they are listed below there. These could be also looked at slightly in a different way. So how the population trends during the last 12 years are linked with the migratory behavior. So the resident species have declined about on average median 6%. Short distance migrants, which are breeding mainly in Europe and Mediterranean areas, have slightly increased, and then the long distance migratory species breeding in tropical areas have declined about 20%. So this just tells that there's also problems in Finland because the resident species, which are year-round here, are declining, but also we need to have international collaborations to especially to help the long-distance migratory species, like the autumn and bunting below here. There's also differences in general about the how the species are distributed. So northern species have the highest declines, and the southern species, which would expect to expand based on the climate change towards northern areas, even there's on average slightly negative trend. But the northern species are in the biggest trouble at the moment. The body size is also affecting the population trends, or linked with population trends. So the large size species, like for example here, the white-headed eagle have in general increased, and whereas the small sized species are on average declining most. And this also tells that the protection and hunting regulations are beneficial for large species, and many EU legislations have improved the conservation status of these species. And on the other hand, small size species are more affected by the habitat quality and quantity, and they cannot be managed so easily based on just the protection of the protection status and the hunting, but it requires also some habitat management, for example. Here I have listed a couple of species which are in the biggest extinction risk at the moment in Finland. So these are species which have quite low population size, but also they have declining unfavorable population status. And for example, the turtle dove, which have always been uncommon in Finland, it's basically extinct at the moment. There hasn't been a confirmed breeding for a couple of years. But also the broad-billed sandpiper, which is like a specialist to northern Apameyers, and in that way, like one of these species which Finland has high proportion of the whole EU or European or even global population breeding. It has been declining, and the reasons for declines are not known. Some of these species, like the short-billed dunlin and the Återland bunting, have been already studied a bit more intensively over the past years. So there are certain of species have been studied, but like golden oriole, there's basically nothing done in recent times. Here I have listed the most important pressures and threats among these 122 species. So it's good to be aware of that these are not concerning all the species in Finland. So typically these are with uncommon species, more towards water birds, which have some conservation related topics. For example, they are listed in Annex 1 of the Annex 1 or Annex 2 in the EU Bird Directive. So don't take this as a kind of list which would apply to all the Finnish birds, but it's like a subset of that. So it's a long list. I go through it briefly and explain what it means. So these categories are directly based on the EU Bird Directive, and sometimes it requires quite a bit of thinking of which category we should pick up and how to explain that. So the first two ones are the alien predators, raccoon dog and mink. So these are especially for many water birds breeding in inland lakes or in the archipelago. They can be problematic. So this doesn't necessarily concern that we have evidence that they are already causing the declines, but there's like a risk that they might influence the population. So like a potential threat, not also in the future. Forestry and agricultural measurements have been causing also decrease in the water quality due to forest ditching and farmland emissions, and that has affected quite a few water bird species. Then there's hunting and illegal killing. So hunting is where the hunting is allowed, but then illegal shooting and killing is also happening. Also in Europe, this is not always the case that these things would be happening somewhere far away, but these can also occur nearby. Then problematic species category includes diseases. So there's a potential risk that the avian flu could affect certain, especially colonial waterbird species, which are breeding in a larger concentrations, but also some birds of prey species like peregrine falcons or could be potentially affected by the avian flu. Energy, wind power, collisions, disturbance have been listed as a potential threat. There's currently not much evidence that how that would affect the current population trends, but that especially in the near future, this might be affecting more and more bird populations. And also like the cumulative effect of the wind power is not well understood. Climate change, direct and indirect effects, is especially concerns the northern species, which are retracting towards north. Then this category infrastructure, sport, tourism, leisure activities concerns direct disturbance by humans. So tourism or other human activities could cause disturbance for species which are sensitive to disturbance. Forestry practices is also listed there, so it can affect species which are occurring in older forest or preferring older trees. So this is of course a rather well defined problem in many cases, but still there's quite a lot of things that are not known. So this is the first part of the talk, and then the idea is to go to the knowledge gaps, more general themes. So I will present some of the things topic first, and then there will be Tony and Andy and Kimi will be giving some additional habitat specific points. But let's start first. So the general topic themes that haven't been that much studied are especially demographics. So often we have, based on the common bird monitoring, we get these kind of population trend patterns. So these are updated every year based on the monitoring. But in this case, the magpie, which has been declining severely during the past 25 years. And if magpie would be evaluated as we would do the red list evaluation now, it would be definitely red listed based on population declines. But also it's one example that it's rather common species and widespread, and we have actually very little idea why it is declining. Is it caused by changes in survival, breeding success? Of course, in this case, not immigration, emigration, because it's not like a migratory species. Yeah, and what factors are influencing these demographics? And like building these integrated population models, for example, to study the demographics more in detail and what factors are influencing the survival and breeding success could be one way. But even just studying one of these demographic variables and understand that better would be very important in many species. Another topic that hasn't been studied that much is the factors affecting the demographics during outside the breeding season, so along the migration route or in the wintering grounds, and how the land use and climatical variables are shaping the population size. Here is an example: is the sedge warbler, which is a very common small passerine in Finland. It also shows long-term decline, but also quite a lot of annual variation. And here there's quite a lot of information on for example, from constant effort site trapping. So we would be able to estimate the annual survival and breeding success for this species, but these haven't been studied so that what are they like? Are there been changes in those? Knowledge gaps, general themes, spatial differences. So often the population changes are not similar in all parts of Finland. So there are spatial differences, and this is an example of the line transect survey results from Eurasian robin, where you can see that the first, the one in the left and one in the middle are showing the population abundances on 50 by 50 kilometer grid cells across the country. And then the right-hand panel gives you how the local population abundances have been changing. So all the negative colors are meaning negative population trends, and red ones are increases. So overall, the robin has been declining. It's not known what is the reason for that, but also there are spatial differences. So especially it has been declining in the central Finland, in the east, whereas it has been doing better in the west and perhaps in the southwest. Another example, this is based on the bird atlas data. So there has been 4 atlases in Finland. The left map is showing the combined first 2 atlases. The one in the middle is the 2006-2010 atlas in Arctic tern, and in this case, and then the right one is the most recent one updated, which ended last year. And you can see that the species has been losing range quite a lot in the northern part of the country, whereas there seems to be no range declines or retractions in the south, along the archipelago. And also here there's no idea why the species is declining in the north. It should be in a way opposite direction if in terms of the climate change point of view, where the species would be shifting its range northwards, but this seems to be the opposite here. And also spatial differences can be looked at between the nearby countries. So in this case, like lapwing and curlew, which are the 2 most abandoned farmland waders, they have different population trends if you compare Finland and Sweden and Norway. So the gray line here is the Finnish population trend. So the species seems to be doing better in Finland, whereas they are declining more in Sweden and Norway. And there has been already quite a lot of collaboration between Norway and Finland and Sweden. So that's also something to consider. Not necessarily use the Finnish national data, but also combine with the nearby countries. And in the long run, the curlew have been also declining. So during this study period, it was slightly increasing in Finland. Then some other general topics. Here are the land use changes, which are, of course, causing quite a lot of different kinds of changes in the environment. We will go more into details with the different habitat types later on, but for example, traffic and widow collisions both have been, the rough estimates that there are more than 1 million birds killed every year, but we don't know what kind of population impact that has. We have some studies like some master thesis studies and so on, that we have some kind of idea which species are more vulnerable than others, for example, concerning the window collisions. But for example, the eagle owl over here, about 4% of the nestlings that are ringed are found collided with the cars. So, and of course, not all the individuals are found. So traffic can be quite important mortality factor for the species, and it's not well studied at all. Then wind farms was mentioned earlier, the collision and disturbance effects and all the cumulative effects, how that is influencing species, and then also the solar energy, for example, which is especially might be affecting the farmland areas. So quite a lot of farmlands may be turned into more energy production, and that's we have little idea what kind of consequences this might have, and also the cumulative effect of that, how that might be influencing. Some other general themes, diseases, maybe the well-known case where we know that the disease has influenced the population decline is the greenfinch over here. Here's the nest of the species, where a Trichomonas parasite caused a severe decline. Now it's something like minus 80% of the population since 2008. And still seems to be going slightly downwards, although not so fast as it used to be. But there might be some other diseases emerging, and also it's not well known, the topic overall. Alien predators, there has been some nest predation experiments, also using camera traps and so on, predator removal experiments, but overall the impact of the predation, even on alien predators, it's not so well studied in natural conditions. Then hunting, there has been a little bit work done on water birds and grouse in northern Europe, but overall it's not well studied topic. And then what comes to, for example, declining corvids or large gulls, these are not studied at all. Quite large numbers of them are hunted every year, but the impact of that on population level, it's not well understood. And the disturbance, so some species might be sensitive to human presence, even tourism by bird watchers, and what is the importance of that on the populations. And also general themes like habitat restoration and protection. Now that the EU restoration law will be a central part of the EU nature policy in the coming decades, and there will be quite a lot of restoration action done in the coming years, it would be important to also understand how effective these restoration actions are, and what kind of changes there are in species composition or species populations, for example, in peatlands or wetlands, or also in urban areas where the tree canopy cover should be increasing due to urban planning. So that was a part of the general topics, and then the idea is to move to these habitat-specific themes. And the first one I have listed here is the farmland. Farmlands where EU restoration law is affecting it has like a birds is a central part of it. So there's a farmland bird indicator which should be increased in the future. This can be found from the luonnontila.fi website. What are the species listed there? And quite a lot of research has been actually done earlier already in the farmland habitat what comes to farmland birds. This is especially concerning the habitat use of species. And if you want to look at the background information, we published 2 years ago a report for the forestry, for the Ministry of Agriculture and Forestry, which was summarizing sort of the research results of the target species in what has been done in Northern Europe perspective. But what is not that well known is that how the small scale habitat changes or the habitat changes at the farmland borders, for example, are affecting the populations, or how the combination of the habitat types are affecting the populations. And breeding success and survival, like I mentioned earlier in the demographic side, that's very poorly known. For example, in curlews or lapwings, it could be possible to monitor the nests and figure out what's going on there. And also the food availability for species is poorly studied. And I've listed here some of the study species which are, or potential study species which are declining in farmland habitat types, where the reasons for the declines are not for example, always well understood. And also like house sparrows and swifts, magpies, they also occur in other habitat types, like in urban areas, and also there hasn't been studied. Then I give the floor to Toni, who will tell more about the forest part. Go ahead, Toni.
Thank you, Aksu. You can have a well-deserved break now, and good morning, everybody. As you know, Finland is one of the most forested countries in the world. About 3/4 of our land area is forest. So it makes a huge difference to birds what kind of forests that means. And as you can see from the following maps, can you actually change this? About 1,000 years ago, most of Finland was still natural forest. We of course had some civilization here in the Turku region already, but the rest of the country was mainly natural forest. And during the last 1,000 years, with an accelerating pace, this forest has been used for something. And natural forest remains basically only in northern Finland and in very small fragments in southern Finland anymore. And if we look at the age structure of the forests in the next slide, we can see that this dark blue area, so this is southern Finland, and this is the proportion of forests on the y-axis. The dark blue, which would be something we call old forest, more than 120 years old, has been in very low proportion already for more than 100 years. So the great majority of our forests are basically under 80 years old. And from 80 onwards to 120, we call this mature forest. So very little old forest or even mature forest is left. And the next slide. This means basically that if there are really old growth forest species, we don't see their historical declines in the recent data that we have collected in the systematic bird surveys. We just don't see that anymore because it may have happened so long time ago. So this is something important to keep in mind. But still, we currently see some of these species declining. A well-known example is the willow tit. We know that this mature or old forest is important for some species. We know this mainly from studies where we measure the surface area of these mature or old forests from remote sensing data, and we relate these to some bird metrics. But we don't really know what are the important structural features for the birds in the three-dimensional forest space, in the real forest habitat. And this is something that would be really worth studying. And this is possible, for example, to do with current mobile laser scanning devices, or even airborne laser scanning devices are giving some of these data, and the technology moves forward. But importantly, we think that we should go more into the forest and try to see what the forest is like, because age alone is, of course, just one aspect of the forest. What is the structural thing that makes it important for the birds? And when we get into this, we actually might get rid of much of the error variation in the data. We don't really know for most species what is the mechanism behind the importance of the old forest. Is it because the birds are sort of prisoners of their habitat selection behavior? Is it the real lack of nest sites? Is it survival, that they survive better in the old forests, or they reproduce better there? We don't know for most species whether it is food or predation or maybe disease. For example, for the small owls, pygmy owls, and Tengmalm's owls, we know that they benefit from mature forests around, but is it because they have more food there, such as small mammals, or is it because they are more safe from predation there? Different people have different ideas, but we have very little data on this because very few people are measuring actually food abundances in the different habitats for different bird species. This would be something really important to understand for the future. And of course, because the great majority of our forest is managed forest, even if we would bit by bit be able to increase our protected areas, the impact of the different management alternatives is also very big. If you move on to the next slide, Aksu. And by this, I mean, for example, well, the age structures, the structural diversity of forest, but importantly, the tree species composition and diversity. What are we growing in the forest, and how does this impact different species? This is poorly understood at the moment. There's a lot of discussion about continuous cover versus even-aged forestry. How do they impact? How does continuous cover forestry impact versus different from even-aged? But there's much less research and data than discussion about it. It's important to think what kind of retention trees, which you can see here in the different pictures, we live in what kind of patches. How do we choose them? Are they the most valuable patch in the forest or the least valuable when it comes to birds? It's important to consider when some harvest operations are done, how the species are impacted, and is there something that we can do to help, for example, the forest operators to find the nests that might be there when they are working there and to protect them. When you talk about forestry also impacts waters. We need to think about water management in forests. When water runs into ditches and pools, lakes and sea, how can we improve the water quality there? And importantly, when it comes to birds, can we actually use these water structures to improve conditions for some wetland birds or birds that usually sort of benefit from these small pools, for example, or mudflats? We need to think about this like in the short term and long term. We often just think about the short term. How will something impact the birds in the coming years? But it is important to realize that in the sort of lifespan of forests, we talk about very long time scales. What we do in the forests as management operations now will impact how they look like in 100 years or more than that. And these are aspects that are very little studied, but would be really worthwhile studying. And then we have still some species. Some of them were mentioned already earlier, that are forest species, not necessarily old forest at all, different types of forests, these species declining, but we don't know why. Most of these species would be something where you could actually, by doing hard field work, which would require a lot of effort, but anyway doable, you could go and do some population studies on them. For example, the willow warbler and chaffinch, like Aksu mentioned, two of our most common species. We don't really know why they're declining, how they are doing in our forests, what would they need there. And you could probably easily with hard work, but you could capture these individuals from their territories, tag them, follow their reproductive success and so on. And I have to mention here that you don't need to know immediately how to do this yourself, because, for example, the ringers community in Finland can help in these kinds of things. Many people have experience on specific species, on how to capture them and so on. So by sort of grouping with the ringers, you can do quite a lot. And I guess that's about the forest now, and then we move on to wetlands with Andy.
Thanks, Tony. So yeah, you can put the next slide. Thank you. So I'll talk about wetlands and more generally also about waterfowl. Quite many waterfowl in Finland are declining quite strongly. It's among the most well monitored groups, so we don't really have knowledge gaps in these population trends. We know quite well how they are doing in general. But on the other hand, and well, as Aksu said, in the reporting of the birds directives, we have listed quite many of these threats and possible conservation actions that you can do to help waterfowl. But on the other hand, some of them are quite speculative after all, that we kind of recognize potential threats, but we don't, in quite many of these cases, we don't know the exact mechanisms behind these declines and the demographical mechanisms going on there. Next slide, thank you. But we do know that if we divide the waters into nutrient-rich eutrophic and nutrient-poor oligotrophic waters, we know that the species that prefer nutrient-rich habitats are declining clearly stronger than the ones that prefer oligotrophic or the more generalist species. Some of actually when these waterfowl indicators by water body type have been constructed, the generalist species have been actually they are included in both of them, depending on in which habitats they have been counted. But basically, we see a decline in both of these habitats, but in the nutrient-poor habitats, the decline is clearly smaller, and in recent 10 years, it has been more or less stable, while in nutrient-rich habitats, these declines are still going on, or at least for those species that prefer nutrient-rich habitats. You can take the next slide. Well, like I said, the species themselves are quite well monitored, but data on demographical parameters is quite scarce. Well, among waterfowl, there are some species such as the eider, for example, where quite much studies have been done, but that's in the archipelago. So I would say that especially in inland waters, we know quite little, and especially about the survival. As part of the waterfowl survey, there are done these brood and chick counts. That's something that I would encourage people to do more, because there is much more of these pair abundance counts done on adult waterfowl in the spring than these counts on reproductive success, which are done later in early July. So I would think that there would be a room for improvement, actually. But even though we would have more data on reproductive success, we know very little about the survival of for example, ducks in the inland, both adult and juvenile survival. Effects of hunting are quite poorly studied in these, as Aksu said already, and actually most species. Well, there are hunting statistics collected officially in Finland. They are quite uncertain and they are not spatially explicit, so that they are kind of problems in doing research. And then also most of these species are migratory, and they are not hunted only here, but also along the migration route and at the wintering quarters. So you would have to, in order to assess the effects of hunting, you would need to consider the whole flyway and wintering areas, and you need to have proper spatially linked statistics on harvesting from these different areas. And one reason also why it's important, it's difficult to say very much about the effects of hunting, is also that that we don't know that well the population sizes of these common ducks. I mean, we have some estimates which we are obligated to report to the EU, but after all, I would say that we have quite poor knowledge about the population size, absolute population sizes of these species. It's a different thing to monitor changes in the trends than to estimate absolute population size. So if you know how much have been shot, you would like to know what proportion is shot, and for that you would need to know the population size. I think that's one major issue here. Something we're working on, definitely. But anyway, regarding wetlands, one important knowledge gap is in the effects of restoration actions. And I think although quite much restoration have been done, and we might know and we might have statistics on what have been done, we have quite little it's kind of a systematically designed before after control impact designs where we could in a rigorous way do kind of we'd have kind of a scientific experimental setting which would tease out the impact of restoration. And I think here is much room for improvement, actually, in really designing, perhaps even when doing these restoration actions, you would already have this kind of information on control areas, and you would have bird data from before when deciding where to do management actions. And while some of these actions are currently studied, I would say that things such as management fishing, introduction of surface infiltration fields, adding dead wood into water bodies, these are things that we know absolutely nothing about how they affect the birds. Removal of vegetation, there's some studies, but they are done quite at the macro level, and more perhaps based on correlation and patterns than these kind of strict Bucky settings. I also list the effects of water chemistry. That has been studied, and we know something about that there are negative effects of eutrophication, brownification of waters. But for example, we know that these eutrophic water specialists are declining. At the same time, we say it's because of eutrophication, over eutrophication. They are too nutrient rich, some of these habitats. But then we just the other day we had a discussion among some of these people in the bird group that why are not part of the eutrophication specialists doing good in the oligotrophic waters if they become more nutrient rich? so the message is that the whole story is probably a bit more complex, and I think there is still things to be studied. And also, I would say in the field of ecotoxicology, there is also, I mean, it was intensively studied in the 60s and so, but I think there's much room for improvement in those studies. Can take the next one, please. As a special type of habitat in typical for wetlands, I would mention reed beds, because I think that although this is a typical habitat where you see birds, and you might have bird watching towers and people go to watch birds, and many common birds such as the sedge warbler, which is kind of always present in these sites, and the bird watchers get them on their list every year, and so on. So you know that if you go to these habitats, you observe the sedge warbler, and in the south you might observe reed warblers, and in some places even great reed warblers and so. But this set of species is something that we know quite little about how these populations are doing, and even the population trends, I would say, they're in a sense a bit uncertain because there are no good monitoring schemes that really would provide information about the abundances of these species in the reed beds, and especially I would say that absolute population densities is quite difficult to get in this kind of reed beds. You would need to do some kind of a transect across these habitats and try to do, for example, distance sampling in order to estimate the population density. But this is something we know quite little about, and I would like to us to think about more that there's actually in some common but also some more uncommon reed bed species that we know surprisingly little about. Thanks. I think that was all I had to say regarding wetlands. Yeah, thanks.
All right. Hi, guys. Welcome to the archipelago. So we are talking about the Baltic Sea and our birds living in the Baltic Sea on our islands of different sizes. And of course, as researchers, we like to tell people about what we know. So let's not try to focus. It's really good exercise to focus on what we don't know for a while. So I would go into a few broad themes that impose threats for our archipelago birds. And firstly, I'd like to talk about ecosystem impact. Of course, climate change is quite well studied, but its linkages to the Baltic Sea and also to the Baltic Sea birds, the archipelago birds, is less known. So we might have direct effects of the climate impacting birds themselves, but of course we might also have climate change effects on the sea or the ecosystem, food webs, predator assemblages, and so on within these within the ecosystem. So we have these indirect effects which are affecting birds. And I have a picture of blue mussels there, and the reason is that it's a keystone species in the Baltic Sea and it's a marine species. And if we get more rain into the Baltic Sea and less salt in the Baltic Sea, that species will have trouble, and it's actually on the border of what it can cope with within Finnish waters. So those are themes with lots of questions still to be answered. Another theme globally, but also affecting the Baltic Sea, is the amount of invasive species flowing in through different routes. So with the mammals, we have the mink and the raccoon dog. They increase predation on ground nesting birds. Of course, they also alter the ecosystem in other ways. They eat all kinds of things moving on the ground, like rodents and amphibians, but this is about birds. So we have plants. We have, for example, the rugosa rose, which is taking over islands with especially sandy areas, but also all kinds of shorelines, and it completely alters the vegetation. We don't really know the effects on birds of that. And then we do have a host of species underwater, which are coming in with ballast water from all kinds of ports and places in the world. One of them is this species here, the round goby, which has become very, very common species, and apparently it has even allowed the cormorant population to increase. At least this is the assessment of the Estonians. So there are effects in both directions. So there are interesting study themes here. Then we can go to the next, which is a classic eutrophication. Andy touched upon this. Even though it's a kind of a classical topic of Baltic Sea research, we still haven't got got it under control, and the kind of contributions of fields and forests has a little bit changed over the recent years, and nowadays we understand more the role of forest runoff into the Baltic Sea. And there are lots of things coupling eutrophication, toxic algae blooms with mussels and mussel-eating birds, for instance. And then to make it even more complicated, which is equals interesting for researchers, is that climate change ties into the rate of eutrophication. So with more heat, we get exacerbated eutrophication. So linkages to all kinds of bird assemblages with this are still quite largely unknown. Now we can go to the final kind of broad theme that I have lifted here today is the kind of chemicalization. The Baltic Sea is a closed basin, and we have quite a lot of stuff going on, lots of human activity, and human activity leads often to all kinds of things leaching into the sea. We still do have these legacy toxins circulating, PCBs, DDTs, mercury, and lead, for instance, which we can find in the sea eagles flying around at the moment. Of course, the eagles are doing better, so these toxins have become less concentrated and so on, but we do still have them, and animals still have biologically meaningful and impactful concentrations of these substances in them. Then we have rising threats, which we have already kind of recognized. Not to say that we've done anything about them or even know their fully their biological impacts, although there are some interesting things going on with PFAS and archipelago birds. There would still be lots to do to do there. And then, of course, we have our eyes on the horizon. We're scanning it all the time, what's happening in the future. And currently we have substances of concern, kind of rising concern. And those are long chain and highly UV resistant plastic chemicals, such as benzotriazole UV stabilizers. So if something is made to resist sunlight and protect plastics, then you can imagine that it's quite hard to break down and it might accumulate. And the food web transmission of these is still unknown, and there will be lots of work to be done on this. A little bit is starting to be done, but there will be lots of questions to be answered in that field. And now we can jump ahead to a few things about archipelago bird data that I would like to lift up is that survival and fecundity estimates are lacking for many species. For one remedy would be to include brood counts into the archipelago bird census. The archipelago bird census counts breeding birds in the archipelago and is now coordinated by us here at Syke, but still we would need to add brood counts there to have an estimate of how is offspring production going. And for survival analysis, we would need coordinated ringing efforts of certain species, or preferably all species, right? But now we only have a few select species with which we can do these kind of things to keep an eye on how survival is changing. And also, I was talking about some bigger picture processes just now, and eutrophication, climate change, chemicalization, all kinds of things will affect the marine ecosystem outside of birds, let's say the underwater ecosystem. And connecting that to birds, and archipelago birds are often mediators between the terrestrial and the marine environments, and having actual data connections between these two ecosystems would be really good, and which could be done maybe with the Velmo data being collected in our sea areas. And also, many birds only breed here and then they disappear and we don't know what's going on. So following the entire annual cycle of migratory birds would be really good. And for that, the technology is going on. Of course, it's developing a bit slowly, and we would like to have better devices, but GPS and geolocator technology is improving. So those are some really could be really productive fields for research. Onward, Axel. Okay, a couple of species examples. This guy here, the ruddy turnstone, is declining very, very strongly. And if you spend time in the archipelago, you have realized this just by being there. And we don't really know what's going on, why they are declining. The terns Axel mentioned earlier today, which these guys live together with, are doing quite fine. So we don't really understand what's driving these guys' strong negative trend. So what you could do with this would be put in a ringing effort on breeding birds, look at breeding site fidelity, and then from that follow offspring production, and then also survival, like I talked earlier, and then also somehow monitor their movements during winter. So for instance, with geolocators or some other small devices, given they are returning to their breeding sites. So just some ideas about that bird. But yeah, then we have almost started to become my favorite now, these large gulls. And the scary thing is that they are declining very strongly and we don't really know why. Well, we kind of know why. Landfills are closed. But looking at the data and kind of having a feel for what's going on, it seems like there's something else going on as well. It feels like the closing of landfills can't really explain all of the declines we're seeing and the strong declines we're seeing. So here, same thing, individual-based study with offspring production, survival, and movement. And with gulls, actually, the movement part is a little bit easier because they don't dive, they don't get cold as easily as diving birds. So we could actually maybe put some, GPSs are being deployed on these guys. So this would also be a very productive line of research. And with that, I think, and if you have archipelago related questions or birds or other things, you can be in touch with me at any time, guys. So thank you for me. Onward to peatlands, I guess.
Thank you, Kimi. So I'll continue now. So then the next habitat type is the peatland. So then this concerns also especially the restoration. So there's millions of hectares of peatland has been ditched over the historical decades, and quite a few large areas should be restored also in the future due to EU restoration law. And what kind of impact that has is also, of course, very, very crucial for several declining peatland species. Overall, even the habitat use of these species is often not well known. I've listed there one paper that we published some years ago that basically that wetter habitat or larger peatlands are usually preferred by these many of the waders, but overall it's more like what's the specific characteristics what these peatland species are preferring. It's not well known. And also the joint effect of ditching and climate change. The ditches, existing ditches can still dry the peatlands. So even if the open peatland is protected, the surrounding ditches can cause habitat loss. And also the climate change might be leading to the drying of the peatlands and changing the ecosystem. So the impact of these should be studied definitely in the future. It's very little known about the breeding success and survival, also nesting success. And many of these species actually breed often different habitat types, like some peatland species are actually like open habitat generalists. So they can also breed in farmlands or in mountain areas, and it's very little known how these population trends or demographics differ between these habitat types. For example, in curlew, there has been little unpublished studies that they seems to have a better breeding success in peatlands than in farmland areas. But overall, it's not well known. And again, food availability would be important topic to measure. And I've listed here some of the peatland species which are declining, especially the broad-billed sandpiper, spotted redshank, red-decked phalaropes, where a large part of the European population are breeding in Finland. And peatlands in general are like Finland has a high responsibility of the peatland habitats on EU level, and that's why it is important habitat type, but very little studied. And then the mountains, this is also a poorly studied habitat type, including also the population dynamics. We have some surveys going on there every year, so we have some kind of idea about the population trends, but also even just the population trends of the common species or slightly uncommon ones are not always that well known, and there's quite a lot of variation. The sampling is not so strong. Again, here, how are the mountain populations are doing compared to lowland populations? For example, the golden plover here on the left, or the willow warbler, are they doing better in the mountain regions than in the mountain regions than in the lowlands, and how that is affected by the climate change, for example. And mountain birch forest species like the willow warbler we know quite little about it. And one of the things that has been poorly studied is the impact of the reindeer grazing, for example. There's still large groups of reindeers grazing in these landscapes and affecting the vegetation, and might also cause nest failure by tramping. And the blue throat is one of my favorite bird species, strongly declined nowadays, mainly occurring in the mountain birch forest, although it used to breed in the almost in the whole northern Finland. Okay, this is the kind of the gap part. Then we should have a short introduction to the potential data sources. So these include like existing ongoing monitoring schemes and similar kind of topics. I've also got some message that apparently the chat is only visible for panelists, but we'll try to figure out later on how we can get you more connected with and ask questions. But I don't stop it. I will do it now. So write down your questions and we can get back to those once I have finalized this presentation. So first, to study the population changes in habitat selection, the breeding season surveys can be useful data source. I'll go through some of the schemes that are ongoing. So the line transect surveys have been started in 1970s, and this include one visit per site in June and walking along the line. For example, here is the 6-kilometer rectangle. And then the data is separated into 50-meter main belt, wide main belt, and the outside of that is called supplementary belt. And also the habitat type has been collected since 80s along the main belt using the same habitat classes. And also the type of the observation is the bird singing, calling, seen, and so on have been recorded. And this is coordinated by the Finnish Museum of Natural History, and the data is available in li.fi. BirdLife Finland is helping with the coordination, and Metsähallitus is coordinating the line transect surveys in protected areas. So here you can also see that the line transects can also be inside and outside protected areas, like this is the border of the protected area over here, and you can see ditching outside the protected areas occurred. So this is the kind of how the data looks like. And currently we have had during last 20 years a systematic sampling design in line transects. So there are over 560 line transect survey sites across the country, and these are about half of these are repeated every year, done by 100 volunteers, and this is definitely the most important breeding monitoring scheme of all the. So we can get population trends of more than half of the Finnish bird species based on this scheme only. And this is part of the wider European-wide bird monitoring scheme, so that the data will be also sent to the European coordination part of the EBCC, European Bird Census Council. Then there's the Finnish breeding land bird counts. These have started in 1984. So this includes point count routes, which have 20 points. Each of them are visited 5 minutes. And here the habitat type and the point of the, around the point is defined. And about 50 routes are conducted every year. And this is also coordinated by the Finnish Museum of Natural History, and the data is in li.fi. Here are the map where historical point count routes are situated. It's not so, of course, widespread the coverage nowadays. And here is an example how the locations are. So quite a few of the routes, and especially the most modern one, we know where the exact sampling locations are. But in the historical times, we have quite a lot of gaps that we actually don't know where the exact survey points have been, but more like that in which region the surveys have been done. Then there's the Wildlife Triangle. So this is the run by Natural Resource Institute Finland, Luke. So this is the late summer grouse survey where 12-kilometer transect is conducted. This has also a long tradition. It has started, I think, 1989, and it has a very good coverage over the forested areas. So the idea is there to survey using distance sampling the population sizes of capercaillie, hazel grouse, black grouse, and willow grouse, and you can get the absolute densities also on regional level. You can get the broods, so you can calculate breeding productivity, and also this data is at the moment used spatially to give annual hunting regulations on a regional level. Then there's the waterbird surveys. This is the inland part. So there's a separate scheme for inland wetlands and the archipelago. So the inland waterbird surveys include point counts or round counts. Point counts, you go in one point and you survey what's visible in certain sector, and in round counts you cover by boat or foot the wetland and cover larger regions. And as Andreas mentioned, there's like surveys in oligotrophic and eutrophic lakes, so in different kinds of habitat types. Only waterbirds are surveyed here. This includes 2 visits in May, and about 1,000 sites are covered every year. You can see the map of the survey sites. I think this is the situation last year. So blue and green are the active ones. So this is coordinated by Finnish Museum of Natural History and Natural Resource Institute. Luke is coordinating the hunting side, and the museum is coordinating the bird watchers side. And there's quite a lot of course, historical sites which are not surveyed at the moment, but could be sort of could be activated also later on. And as Andy mentioned, there's also brood counts conducted in July in some of these sites, so you can also get information about the productivity and how big the how large amount of ducklings or chicks there are. And then there's the archipelago counts. So there's also historical counts done back in the days, but more systematic surveys have been conducted since 80s. So this include island-specific surveys, and it's based on visiting the island, counting the nest and number of adults, and often the ringers are also doing this, so they also ring the chicks in the areas later on. So there could be some information about the productivity also in that way. And it's good to realize that quite a few of these wetland species or water bird species are breeding also in the archipelago, but also inland habitat types. And that's why if you want to study the whole national situation, it would be good to use both data sets. Many of them are quite long-lived, like the great backpack gull here. And the map here shows locations of the sampling sites. So the orange ones are unprotected and the green ones are protected sites. This doesn't include this map information from Åland Islands. This is part of Olli Lilja's master thesis that is ongoing at the moment, where we have look at the population trends inside and outside protected areas. And as Kimi mentioned, this is coordinated by Finnish Environmental Institute Syke, but there's also collaboration with Metsähallitus and Luke going on. And another example where several instances are like doing collaboration in the coordination of the scheme. Then the next one is the breeding atlas. So there's 4 different atlas periods, which covers all the breeding bird species in Finland. This is not about abundances. This is about occurrence of the species. What's the probability that the species is breeding within a grid cell? And the data has been collected over these four different periods. And I'll give you one example here, the willow grouse, which has been losing its range especially on the southern range margin, but also the occurrence has become more patchy in the more further north. And this has been a major effort, especially the recent one with the Finnish Museum of Natural History and BirdLife Finland, but also many other instances have been participating here on the data collection. There are thousands of volunteers collecting this information. And now the atlas is done. It hasn't been published, but the data could be also used for research purposes. So that was about the breeding surveys. Then about the non-breeding season data. First of all is the winter bird counts. So this has a long tradition. The first surveys have been conducted already in 50s. There are 3 different survey seasons, one in November, one around the New Year, and one in the late winter. And it's about 10-kilometer long route that is covered by one or multiple observers. All birds are counted. We actually include also mammals nowadays, but because this seminar is about the birds, so we don't talk about more about it. The habitat categories have been also collected since 80s. There's also sex race information. Also, the amount of bird feeders have been collected since 80s, and that could be also linked with the bird numbers. And currently, there's actually almost 700 routes done on annual basis, but if you look at the more long-term average, it's 600 or below, and there's almost 1,000 volunteers participating this on annually. And in certain bird species, which are especially residents and occurring in urban habitat types, this data could be even better than the breeding bird survey. So we have actually used the winter bird count data, for example, to calculate the population trends of house sparrows, because there's much larger sample sizes during the winter than compared to breeding surveys. Then I like to introduce the BirdLife TIRA database. So this includes all kinds of casual observations, more opportunistic records done, submitted by bird watchers, but there's also some systematic data collection, like Big Garden Watch conducted in January, and also migration counts and more systematic migration counts. Some of the bird observatories are using also their Tira as their main data source. So if you're interested on this, BirdLife Finland is the one to contact. I will give you an last as a slide where you can get the contact details of all these schemes, so that you get more. If you are interested, you know where to get in touch. Then we leave the censuses behind, but go more to the demographic databases, data sources, and ringing is of course one of the most important one, or maybe the most important one. There are nowadays over 14 million birds ringed in Finland, and altogether these have there are 1.6 million, more than 1.6 million encounters. So bird has been either recovered, recaptured, or found dead, or seen by bird watcher and recognized from the ring and so on. And these, of course, have been done all around Finland, and this data could be used to study, for example, survival using capture, recapture analyses, productivity, for example, using the brood ring data. So quite a large proportion, maybe even half of the ringing are done during the breeding season. So chicks ringed in nests. So you can get also information about the phenology and the brood sizes and so on. So that could be used to study the potential changes in the productivity. And then there's a special scheme of constant effort site, which includes trapping in the same sites throughout the breeding season. And there you can get information about the survival and productivity of passerines. About 20 species that you can get some kind of information. And that has been used, for example, now currently in Ari Nousenen PhD thesis, but definitely there would be room for other purposes. Then biometrics, quite a lot of ringers are collecting wing length and body mass when ringing birds. Of course, not every bird has this information, but more increasing amount of ringers are gathering this in this data set. So there's a lot of biometrics which could be used to study the body condition, for example, of the individuals. And ringing is often, of course, needed overall needed when tracking is done. So combining the ringing data with the tracking data or other telemetry options would be one way to look at how the birds are moving, which kind of habitat they are using. And ringing data is also important source to study dispersal and migratory connectivity. And the U-ring is the international network of bird ringing centers across Europe. So if you are more interested on a wider scale, these data sources, then U-ring is the one to contact. Ringing is strongly linked with the birds of prey monitoring. So ringers are monitoring same so-called raptor grid squares. There's several tens of squares surveyed every year. Tens of thousands of nests are checked annually. Of course, many of them are empty, but at least you get some kind of information what's going on. So this can be used to study the population sizes and productivity of these species, and it has been rather well used by Finnish ornithologists, but there's definitely, of course, room for other purposes. Typically, it has been certain species like the Eurolol over here, which has been rather well studied, but some other might have got less attention. But there's ringing data and biometrics also related to this survey. And then I think this is the last data source that I have, is the nest card data set. So this is collected by bird watchers as well. So if bird watcher find nest, it can fill a nest card where it can give information how many eggs or chicks have been seen in the given given a nest, and also you can get information about the habitat type or monitoring the breeding success or timing of the breeding. And altogether, the historical dataset includes over 260,000 nest records. And maybe it's good to mention here that also in this scheme, but also in other schemes, there are already some R codes which can help to analyze the basic statistics from the dataset, so that no need to start from the scratch. So this is coordinated by the Finnish Museum of Natural History. Last, I would like to emphasize that, of course, not all the important variables cannot be studied remotely, but just by using large-scale data sets and remote sensing data. But also these detailed site-level field studies are needed. And I strongly encourage, like Tony mentioned earlier, to get more contacted with bird ringers and try to find how these species are trapped, what's already known, what could be studied with collaboration with the ringers. So there's about 700 ringers in Finland, and many of them are really willing to put a lot of effort on ringing birds and collecting data so that it could be used for research and conservation purposes. And there's definitely new technical devices, including tracking devices, thermal cameras, camera traps, which could be combined with this work and try to find more detailed information. Thermal cameras, for example, could be a useful tool to find bird nests, which have been, for certain species, quite challenging in the past, but that might be helping in the future. I think I stop now. So here is the list of the affiliations of the bird expert groups, and also the ministries of agriculture and forestry and Ministry of Environment are strongly involved in these when using these data sets with the environmental authorities. And I have listed here the contact details, so that if you are interested in certain data types, here are the contact details to do that. I'll let this be for a couple of seconds still, and then we could move to the last part of the program, which is the short introduction from the Ornis fennica. I wonder if Kimi, Tony, or Andy could give the authority rights to the Mia, so that she can give the talk about Ornis. But yeah, here is the slide for the Ornis fennica.
I don't think actually we can do that, so.
Oh, okay. Then
maybe you need to
wait a second.
Yeah.
So Mia should soon have a now possibility to talk. Are you online, Mia?
Yes, I am, and I think I was able now to open my mic and start the video. I hope you're hearing me.
Yes, we can. Good.
Yes,
Go
excellent.
ahead.
Thank you. So, good morning, everyone, and thank you for this opportunity to give a presentation about what is going on in Ornis Fennica and some news. I'm Mia Rönkä. I'm one of the editors-in-chief of Ornis Fennica, along with Selin Arcel and Elina Mäntylä. I'm from the Department of Biodiversity Sciences at the University of Turku. And it's nice to be able to give this presentation, because when you are, for instance, filling in these knowledge gaps about the birds, you are most welcome to publish them in Ornis Fennica. Next slide, please. So Ornis Fennica is a peer-reviewed international ornithological journal. In spite of the name Ornis Fennica, we welcome publications, submissions from all over the world. And our scope is analytical and experimental papers on the ecology, behavior, and biogeography of birds. Ornis Fennica is published by BirdLife Finland. It's an open access journal without page charges, and it's published quarterly. And we have an online early practice, and we also announce all our publications in social media. The impact factor is 1.2, and this is a very established journal. It has been published since 1924. And here you can see the one of the latest issues. Next slide, please. And as said, we publish 4 issues yearly, and among these we have now upcoming 2 special issues. One is about Euro-African flyways. That's already work in progress, and for next year we will have a special issue on cormorants, which is really interesting. There will be a submission deadline this autumn, and it will be published next spring, and there will be more information about this special issue soon. And next slide, please. And I would like to acknowledge our editorial board. So Selin, Elina, and I are continuing now as editors-in-chief and continuing the great work by Patrick Carrel. You can also see our associate editors. Some of them have been with Ornis Fennica for a longer time. We have some new recruits, Bertie Mooring and Joe Cooper. And our technical editor is Amalie Ask. And next slide, please. As said, we are communicating in social media, so please check our Blue Sky and Facebook accounts, and you will also find more information about the journal on our journal website, which also functions as a submission system. So you will also find more information there about how to submit. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mia. Let me think I can get back to this. I could still put the contact details slide perhaps visible. And I'll stop the recording.